Last video on arguments that you can help your broker make to lower your workers' compensation premium. The first topic we're going to talk about are pre-hire physicals. Many employers have post-offer pre-hire physicals as part of their procedures for screening employees to make sure they're physically capable of performing the duties of the job. However, the nature of a pre-hire physical and what's entailed differs significantly from one employer and one physician to another. So for example, if the pre-hire physical requires some screening to try to identify if there's any back injuries, that screening might simply entail a back x-ray. Well, a back x-ray is only going to identify structural issues. It's not necessarily going to identify issues with the muscular system or with nerve damage. And so pre-hire physical for testing for back injuries might be more extensive, where the physician actually has the employee perform some physical moves to see if there's any limitation on the employee's ability to perform the duties on the job. And this can be done in conjunction with x-rays or separate and apart from x-rays. But the point is to identify for the broker all of the things that are done in the pre-hire physical because it's different from employer to employer and doctor to doctor. And the extent of the work that is done to try to prevent future injuries is important for the underwriter to know to try to drive your premium down. Secondly, sometimes claims are misdiagnosed, and only the employer knows this. So if a doctor, for example, misdiagnoses a claim and the claimant is being treated in a particular fashion and it's inappropriate or isn't effective at actually treating the injury can get worse, or the employee might have to start over with brand new treatment to actually address the real problem. And a lot of these things aren't identified in the loss runs, and the employer may be aware of this, but the broker is not. So this is something that you need to convey to the broker if you're aware of these issues. And again, very important for you to read the loss runs on a regular basis to make sure that you're trying to identify anything that looks abnormal, looks out of place. And you can help the broker make arguments around these issues. Payroll trends. For larger employers, underwriters tend to do a projection of future losses based on obviously past losses, but also based on payroll, because payroll is the measure of exposure, the measure of exposure to injury. So for example, if an employer for 4 years in a row had payroll of exactly $500,000, and suddenly payroll for the coming year jumped up to $1 million, what the underwriter would do is take the historical losses and then double them. And that's obviously fair, because if you have twice as many workers, then your historical losses are likely to double. It's a proportionate adjustment that the underwriters do that makes sense. But a lot of times, the brokers aren't necessarily aware of payroll adjustments that you're making. And so if your payroll is going down, it's important to convey that to the broker so that the broker can make the appropriate adjustments for the underwriter. Don't rely on the underwriter to do it, but make the argument yourself as to why future claims should be lower than they've been in the past simply because your payroll is lower. So that, again, that's something the broker should know this. Most good brokers collect payroll history, but sometimes it's not apparent, or it might not be apparent in a particular class code. You might have a particular class of employee that is high hazard, and suddenly while your total payroll is the same, the percentage of payroll in that more hazardous class has gone down. So this is something that wouldn't necessarily jump out to a broker that you can convey. Also, employee trends. This is something that brokers might not be aware of. So for example, in the past, you may have hired a lot of employees and trained them, inexperienced employees, and brought them on board and trained them. And again, inexperienced employees are more likely to have workers' compensation claims. Perhaps you change your procedure and now you're only hiring employees who have no less than 3 years of experience in your industry, and obviously those employees will be expected to be safer over the long term. And that should be conveyed to the broker. That's a really good argument to make to underwriters as to why you're a superior risk compared to what you were in the past, or what the underwriter might have assumed you were simply by looking at the base application. And finally, litigation rates. Again, the loss runs from the insurance companies don't always convey all of the information that's important for an underwriter to know about your business. But litigation rates, the number of claimants that actually go out and get an attorney to represent them during a workers' compensation claim issue, that has a direct negative impact on the size of the claim. Litigated claims have a much higher claim value overall than do non-litigated claims. So it may not be apparent in the loss runs that you have a really low litigation rate. That very few of your employees have ever gone out to get an attorney to represent them. And that should be conveyed to the broker. That's a really good argument. Underwriters love to see low litigation rates, but it isn't always apparent in the loss runs.